My name is Eleanor Marsh. I am 67 years old. On a Wednesday morning in October, my daughter-in-law Kristen stood in the doorway of the bedroom I had been sleeping in for 14 months, holding 2 of my suitcases that she had already packed without asking me, and told me, in a voice loud enough to carry down the hallway and into the kitchen where my son was eating breakfast, that they did not have space for an old Parasite and that I needed to be out of the house before she got home from work. She set the suitcases in the hallway with the particular thud of someone who has been rehearsing this moment for a long time and finally feels entitled to perform it. Then she picked up her handbag, stepped around me as though I were a piece of furniture she was tired of navigating, and left for work. I stood in that hallway for approximately 30 seconds. I looked at the suitcases. I looked at the bedroom door she had left open behind her. The room where I had been recovering from a hip replacement surgery that had gone unexpectedly complicated and had kept me dependent on assistance for longer than any of us had originally planned. I looked down the hallway toward the kitchen, where I could hear my son Marcus not moving, not speaking, not coming to say a single word on my behalf. And then I picked up my phone, walked back into the bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and called a man named David Okafor, who is the director of acquisitions at a coastal development company called Pacific Meridian Properties, whom I had been in quiet, careful negotiation with for the previous 6 weeks. David answered on the second ring. I said, "David, I would like to proceed with the full sale at the agreed price." He said, "Excellent, Eleanor. We can have the paperwork ready by Friday." I said, "Friday works perfectly." I thanked him, ended the call, and sat for a moment in the particular quiet of a decision that has been building for a long time and has finally become very simple. What Kristen did not know, what Marcus did not know, what neither of them had thought to verify in 14 months of treating me like an inconvenience they were contractually obligated to house, was that the beach house on Crescent Cove Road that Kristen had been calling her beach house for 9 years, the property she had been renovating and decorating and showing to her friends and describing at dinner parties as our family's coastal property, had been in my name alone since the day I purchased it in 1991, and I had just agreed to sell it to a demolition and development company for $1,040,000. This is that story. Before I take you back to the beginning, I want to stop and ask where you are in the world right now. What country? What city? What time is it where you are sitting? Leave it in the comments below because I genuinely want to know who is in this conversation with me. And if you connect with stories about women who were dismissed and diminished by people who forgot who they were actually dealing with, who were patient and precise and completely prepared when the moment arrived, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. Now let me take you all the way back. I am Eleanor Marsh, born Eleanor Grace DuPont, in Portland, Maine, in 1957, the second daughter of a marine engineer and a woman who taught secondary school mathematics for 31 years, and who believed, with a firmness that shaped everything about how I moved through the world, that a woman's financial independence was not a luxury or a preference, but an absolute necessity that should be constructed as early and as deliberately as possible and maintained without apology, regardless of what any relationship asked of her. My mother paid her own bills the month she married my father and continued to do so in her own account until the day she died. I watched her do this my entire childhood, and I internalized it as completely and naturally as I internalized language. I married Robert Marsh in 1982. Robert was a structural engineer with a gift for finding calm in complex situations and a laugh that arrived from somewhere genuine and deep and lit up the rooms he was in. We were married for 23 years before he died of a sudden cardiac event on a Tuesday afternoon in 2005, at his office desk at the age of 51. He was reviewing plans for a bridge project he had been working on for 18 months. The coroner said it was fast. I have held on to that. We had one son, Marcus Robert Marsh, born 1986. He is 38 years old now. The beach house on Crescent Cove Road in Harwick, Oregon, is a property I purchased in the summer of 1991, when Marcus was 5 years old and I was 34, with money I had saved from my own income as a commercial interior designer over 8 years of practice. supplemented by a modest inheritance from my maternal grandmother that had been sitting in a conservative investment account since I was 22 and waiting for exactly the right use. The house cost $218,000 in 1991, which was a significant amount for that market at that time, and which I paid for, to be completely precise, without Robert's financial contribution. Not because Robert was unwilling, but because my mother's voice was very clear in my head, and the money was mine, and the house felt like the right place to put it. And Robert understood that completely and supported it without question, because Robert was the kind of man who understood things like that without requiring them to be explained more than once. The house is 1,200 square feet on a quarter-acre lot 50 meters from the Pacific Ocean. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a kitchen that I redesigned myself in 2003, with penny tile and open shelving and a window above the sink that frames the horizon line of the water in a way that has made every person who has ever stood at that sink stop what they were doing and simply look. There is a wraparound porch with 2 Adirondack chairs I have owned since the mid-90s and repainted 5 times. The lot has mature shore pine and a gravel path to a private beach access staircase. It is, by any measure, a beautiful and valuable piece of property on the Oregon coast, and it has been in my name, on the county assessor's records, on the title, in my estate documents, and in my name alone, since the day I closed on it in August of 1991. I want to tell you about Marcus and about how the situation at his house came to exist, because the situation did not arrive without a history, and the history matters. Marcus is a good person in the fundamental sense of that phrase, kind to strangers. He is generous with his time in ways that cost him something. He has a gentle quality that I have always believed he inherited from Robert, and which has always made me feel, when I am not managing the frustration of the particular situation I am about to describe, a genuine and uncomplicated love for him. He is also a person who has spent the last 9 years in a marriage that has slowly, incrementally, and with considerable skill on his wife's part, narrowed the territory of his own judgment until the area of his house life where he operates independently is approximately the size of a studio apartment in a building where Kristen owns the lease. Kristen Ann Parrish Marsh is 36 years old. She works as a marketing director for a regional hospitality brand headquartered in Portland. She is precise, ambitious, well-organized, and possessed of the particular kind of social intelligence that allows a person to be the most charming presence in any professional room, while simultaneously running a very different dynamic in private. I recognized this quality in Kristen at approximately the 4th family dinner we shared, when I observed the way her face changed by a fraction between addressing the room and addressing Marcus directly, and I stored that observation carefully and said nothing, because it was a 4th dinner, and I was not Marcus's manager, and he was a grown man who had the right to make his own choices. I continued storing observations and saying very little for 9 years. In the context of what eventually happened, I want to be clear that my silence in those 9 years was not weakness. It was a patient reading of a situation I was watching develop, and an accurate assessment of when and how it would matter. Marcus and Kristen live in a 4-bedroom house in the Selwood neighborhood of Portland. They bought it in 2017 with a 30-year mortgage and a down payment that included $25,000 I gave them as a gift for the purpose, with full and deliberate generosity, because it was their home and because I wanted them to have a solid foundation, and because giving people you love the things they need when you are able to is one of the better uses of a life. I say this not to establish a ledger, but because the character of what I gave and the character of what was later taken from me are usefully contrasted. I moved into their guest bedroom in August of the previous year, 14 months before the morning with the suitcases. My hip replacement surgery had been scheduled for 6 years and finally became non-negotiable when the pain reached the point of affecting my ability to work. My surgery is performed at Providence Portland Medical Center on the 4th of August. The initial recovery timeline was 8 to 12 weeks, after which I expected to return to my own apartment in Northwest Portland and resume my life. What happened instead was a complication. a post-surgical infection in the third week of recovery that required intravenous antibiotic treatment, a second procedure to address it, and a recovery timeline that extended from 12 weeks to approximately 8 months of managed healing before I would be safely mobile and independent. My apartment on the 4th floor of a building without a ground floor entrance was not accessible to me during this period. My son invited me to stay in his guest room. I accepted because there was no reasonable alternative and because I believed, with the trust that mothers extend to sons they raised, that the invitation was genuine. The first 6 weeks were fine. Kristen was civil. Marcus was attentive in the focused way he is attentive when a situation has a defined duration and a visible endpoint. A home health aide named Consuela came 3 mornings a week, and I paid for her out of my own account. I paid for my own groceries, ordered them online and had them delivered, prepared my own meals when I was able to, and accepted help when I was not. I was a careful houseguest who understood that I was in someone else's home and who conducted herself accordingly. I was also not, I want to be clear, helpless. I was healing slowly from a complicated surgical recovery, but I was fully cognitively present, professionally active through remote client consultations, managing my own finances with complete independence, and engaged in the 6 weeks of preliminary conversations with David Okafor at Pacific Meridian Properties that had begun in early September, approximately 1 month after I moved in. The shift in Kristen's behavior began at approximately week 7 and developed with a steadiness that I recognized as deliberate rather than situational. The first indication was a conversation I was not meant to hear between Kristen and a friend on a phone call she took in the kitchen while I was on the porch outside the open window, in which she described me as deadweight. She was stuck managing because Marcus could not say no to his mother. The second indication was a dinner party Kristen hosted in week 9, at which she introduced me to her colleagues as Marcus's mothers, who is staying with us while she recovers, with an emphasis on the word staying that communicated duration and inconvenience simultaneously. The third was a conversation she had with Marcus that I heard through the guest bedroom wall at 11:30 at night, approximately 2 months into my stay, in which she said, with the clarity of a woman who had been waiting to say something for a while, "I did not sign up to run a nursing home in my own house, Marcus. And if your mother is not out of here by the new year, I am going to lose my mind." Marcus said something I could not fully hear. Kristen said, "I don't care what the doctor said. She is using this as an excuse to stay indefinitely and you are letting her." I lay in the dark of the guest bedroom and I listened to my son say nothing that changed the direction of the conversation. I noted that. I noted it carefully, the way I had been noting things for 9 years, and I added it to my understanding of what was happening in that house and what it meant for what I needed to do next. The beach house conversations with David Okafor had begun, as I said, in early September, approximately 1 month after my surgery. I had been considering selling the Crescent Cove Road property for approximately 2 years before the surgery, for reasons entirely unrelated to Marcus and Kristen and entirely related to my own life. I was 67 years old. I had not been able to visit the property as frequently as I once had. The annual maintenance costs had increased significantly with the property's age. I had a financial advisor named Patricia Shen who had been managing my investment portfolio for 11 years and who had been suggesting for 2 of those years that converting the property's value into a more liquid and managed investment vehicle made strong financial sense given my stage of life and the property's appreciated value. Patricia was right, and I knew she was right, and the primary reason I had not acted was sentimental, because the house was where Marcus had spent childhood summers, and where Robert had sat in the Adirondack chairs for the last time in the summer of 2004, and where I had stood at the kitchen window with the horizon line of the Pacific, and felt, more reliably than anywhere else in the world, that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The surgery changed my thinking, not because of the pain or the complication, but because of the particular clarity that arrives when your body forces you into stillness, and you use the stillness to examine what you are holding on to and why. I lay in the guest bedroom at Marcus and Kristen's house in the first weeks of September, and I thought about the beach house with the honesty of a woman who is 67 and has buried a husband and understands that sentimentality is a luxury that should not be permitted to override financial prudence indefinitely. I called Patricia. She connected me with 3 potential buyers she had been quietly cultivating on my behalf. One of them was David Okafor at Pacific Meridian Properties, a coastal development company that had been acquiring and redeveloping properties along the Oregon and Washington coastline for 11 years. David made the strongest offer and had the cleanest acquisition structure, and within 3 weeks we were in substantive negotiation. I want to tell you about Kristen and the beach house because this part of the story requires careful telling. Kristen had been visiting the Crescent Cove Road property since the first summer she and Marcus were together, 9 years ago. She loved it with the particular enthusiasm of a person who has found something they would not have been able to obtain on their own and has decided to treat their access to it as ownership. This is not a criticism of her taste. The house is genuinely lovely, and her enjoyment of it was genuine. But over 9 years, Kristen had begun referring to the beach house in language that concerned me. Not legally, because the title was clear and my ownership was unambiguous, but as an indication of how she understood the future. She called it our family house at dinner parties. She described renovation ideas to friends as plans she was making. She had, in the summer 3 years ago, hired a painter to redo the exterior trim in a color she had chosen without consulting me, presenting it afterward as a gift she had done for the house, and I had received it as what it was, an assertion of claimed ownership, and I had said thank you with the composure of a woman who is keeping a very clear mental record. In the 14 months I was staying in their house, Kristen mentioned the beach house 7 times in my presence, in terms that implied eventual possession. She said things like, "When we eventually take over the maintenance of the property. And I've been thinking about what we'll do with the 2nd bedroom once the house is ours to manage." And on one occasion at a dinner with friends, Eleanor has been very generous about letting us use the beach house all these years, but eventually it will come to us anyway. That last sentence was said with a small social smile directed at me that contained, in equal and precisely balanced measure, warmth and the absolute certainty that she was correct. I smiled back. I did not correct her. I was, at that point, already 2 months into conversations with David Okafor, and the correction was being handled through the appropriate channels. Now let me tell you what happened in the 6 weeks between early September and the morning of the suitcases, because the timeline is important, and the actions I took during that period were careful, legal, and entirely mine to take. My negotiations with David Okafor proceeded through 4 rounds between early September and mid-October. Pacific Meridian Properties had a specific use plan for the Crescent Cove Road parcel that involved demolition of the existing structure and development of a multi-unit coastal residential project. David was transparent about this from the first conversation. The existing house would not be preserved. I asked myself, with complete honesty, whether this was a consideration that should affect my decision. I sat with it for 3 days. Then I called Patricia and I called my estate attorney, a woman named Susan Farrell, who has handled my documents for 16 years, and I proceeded. The house was mine. The decision was mine. The history that the house contained. Robert in the Adirondack chairs, Marcus at age 7 learning to find sand dollars at low tide. The kitchen window and the horizon line. Those things lived in me and would continue to live in me regardless of what happened to the physical structure. I was not selling Robert. I was not selling my son's childhood. I was selling a piece of coastal property that I owned at a price that reflected 33 years of market appreciation to a buyer with a legitimate development plan. The agreed purchase price was $1,040,000. After the mortgage, which had been fully retired for 19 years, after Susan's fees and closing costs, after the capital gains considerations Patricia had structured for efficiency, the net proceeds to me were approximately $916,000. Patricia had a reinvestment structure ready. I instructed David to prepare the paperwork for Friday. I want to tell you about the morning of the suitcases in detail, because the details are what make it real. It was a Wednesday in the 3rd week of October. I had been awake since 5:30, not from pain, which had diminished to a manageable level over the preceding weeks, but from the particular alertness of a person who has a significant decision in final motion and whose mind will not settle until the paperwork is signed. I heard Marcus leave for work at 7:15. I heard Kristen moving through the house at 7:40, the specific sounds of a woman in her own kitchen, performing the morning with the brisk efficiencies of someone who has somewhere to be and is not happy about the extra presence in the house she is navigating around. At 7:58, the bedroom door opened without a knock. Kristen stood in the doorway. She was dressed for work in a gray blazer and dark trousers, her hair done, her bag over one shoulder. Behind her in the hallway were two of my suitcases, my large navy rolling case and my smaller leather weekend bag. They were packed. She had been in my room, opened my drawers and my wardrobe, and packed my belongings into my own luggage without asking me, without waking me, without a single word of discussion or warning. I looked at the suitcases. I looked at her face, which held the expression of a woman who has made a decision and is not interested in negotiating it. She said, "We need to talk about the living situation, Eleanor." I waited. She said, "This isn't working. We don't have space for this anymore." I said, "For what?" She said, louder than necessary, loudly enough to carry down the hallway and into any room of the house that had ears. "We don't have space for an old parasite. I packed your things. I need you out before I get home today." Then she set the suitcases in the hallway with two deliberate thuds, stepped around me, walked to the front door, left. I stood in the hallway for 30 seconds. I counted them, not because I needed 30 seconds to recover, but because I wanted to be certain of what I had heard and certain of what I felt about it before I moved. What I felt was not shock, because I had been reading this situation for months and shock requires surprise. What I felt was a very specific and very quiet confirmation, the kind that arrives when something you have been accurately predicting finally occurs exactly as predicted. Then I walked back into the bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and called David Okafor. After I ended the call with David, I made two more calls. The first was to Susan Farrell, who confirmed that the sale documents were in final preparation and would be ready for my signature on Friday morning as planned. The second was to my friend Miriam Calloway, who has been my closest friend for 31 years, who owns a large and quiet house in the Laurelhurst neighborhood of Portland, with a guest bedroom she has offered me the use of on no fewer than 4 separate occasions over the past year. Miriam answered before the second ring and said, "Tell me you are finally taking me up on the room." I said, "I am finally taking you up on the room." She said, "I will have the bed made by noon." I thanked her, packed the items Kristen had missed, my laptop, my medications in the bedside drawer, the small framed photograph of Robert I keep on every surface I sleep near, and I called a car service. I was out of Marcus and Kristen's house by 9:47 in the morning. I did not tell Marcus what was happening with the sale. I had not told Marcus during the 6 weeks of negotiations because it was not information he required, and because the property was mine, and the sale was mine, and the decision was mine, and I did not need his input or his permission or his management of the situation. Marcus knew the beach house was in my name. Marcus had known this his entire life. He had simply as people do when they are embedded in a dynamic that serves someone else's interests, stopped thinking carefully about what that fact meant. I signed the sale documents on Friday morning at Susan's office in a building on Southwest Morrison Street, with tall windows and good light, and a view of the West Hills. Susan had reviewed every page. Patricia was available by phone. David Okafor arrived with his acquisitions team at 10 o'clock, and we sat at a long conference table and worked through the closing package in sequence. I signed my name 22 times. Each signature was the same, unhurried and clear. When the last page was complete, David shook my hand and said, "It has been a genuine pleasure, Eleanor." I thanked him for his professionalism throughout the process and meant every word of it. The deed transfer was recorded with the county the following Monday morning. Pacific Meridian Properties' demolition and development permit application was filed concurrently, which is standard for acquisitions of this type, where the development plan is already complete. The permit process in Oregon's coastal zone takes between 6 and 10 weeks. The house on Crescent Cove Road would begin demolition in the late winter. which is approximately when the structural assessment team would have finished their site preparation work. Marcus called me on Saturday, the day after the closing. His voice when I answered had a quality I recognized from the times in his childhood when he had done something he knew he should not have done and was trying to determine whether I was aware of it before he decided how to present himself. He said, "Mom, I heard about what Kristen said Wednesday. I'm really sorry. That was completely wrong." I said, "Thank you for saying so, Marcus." He said, "I should have said something. I should have come out of the kitchen." I said, "Yes, you should have." A pause. Then he said, "I also heard from Aunt Miriam that you called David Okafor on Wednesday morning." I said, "I did." Another pause, longer this time. He said, "Mom, is the beach house? Did you sell the beach house?" I said, "I did. The sale closed yesterday." The silence that followed that sentence lasted 9 seconds. I know because I counted them. Marcus said, "When did this happen?" I said, "I have been in negotiation since September. The decision to sell has been in consideration for approximately 2 years." He said, "Mom, Kristen is," she thought. We both assumed. I said, "Marcus, the property has been in my name since 1991. It has never been jointly owned. It has never been promised to anyone. It was mine to sell when I chose to sell it, and I chose to sell it." He said, "I know that, I know." "But Kristen called me an old parasite in your hallway on Wednesday morning, Marcus. At a volume you could hear from the kitchen. You did not come out of the kitchen." Another long silence. Then he said, "I know." 2 words, the flattest, most honest 2 words he had said to me in 14 months. I want to stop here for a moment because I know that some of you watching this are sitting with a version of this story that belongs to you. Maybe it is not a beach house. Maybe it is a different kind of thing that was assumed away from you. A different kind of person who treated what was yours as though it were simply waiting to become theirs. Maybe it is a different kind of mourning with a different kind of cruelty delivered by someone who had forgotten who they were dealing with. If that is your story, I want you to leave a comment below and tell me you are here. And if this is landing somewhere real for you, please subscribe to this channel. We tell a new story every day, and every story is for the person who needed to hear it. Now let me tell you what happened after Marcus put down the phone. Kristen's response to the sale came through Marcus, in stages, over the following 2 weeks, each stage representing a different strategy in a sequence that revealed, with considerable clarity, how her mind worked when a plan she had been building on quietly for years was suddenly removed from the table. The first stage was disbelief communicated through Marcus, who called me on the Saturday evening after our first conversation to relay that Kristen wanted to know if there was any possibility of rescinding the sale. I told Marcus the sale had closed, the deed had transferred, and there was no mechanism by which I would or could rescind it. Stage 1 closed. The second stage was the suggestion, again relayed through Marcus, that I had made a rushed decision under duress, given my health situation, and that perhaps a legal review of my decision-making capacity was warranted. I told Marcus to tell Kristen that my decision-making capacity was intact, that the sale had been facilitated by my estate attorney of 16 years and my financial advisor of 11 years, both of whom could provide any confirmation required, and that if Kristen wished to pursue a legal challenge to a validly executed property sale by a competent owner, she was welcome to retain counsel and proceed. I heard nothing further on that line of inquiry. Stage 2 closed. The third stage was an attempt by Kristen herself, not through Marcus, to call me directly. She called on the Tuesday evening 10 days after the closing. I picked up because I wanted to hear what she chose to say without an intermediary. She began with an apology for Wednesday morning that was structured, I noticed, primarily around the inconvenience the situation had caused her, rather than around the specific content of what she had said. She said she had been under a lot of stress. She said she had not meant it the way it sounded. I said, "Kristen, what you said's very specific and delivered at significant volume. I think you meant it precisely as sounded." She was quiet for a moment. Then she pivoted to the beach house. She said she wanted me to understand how much the property had meant to her and to Marcus, and to their vision for the family's future. I said, "I understand that. I also understand that the property was mine, and that my vision for my own financial future was the relevant consideration when I decided to sell it. She said, "You could have talked to us." I said, "I could have. I chose not to, for the same reason you chose not to talk to me before you packed my bags." Another silence, longer than the ones with Marcis. Then she said, "That's fair." I thanked her for calling and wished her a good evening. That was, to my knowledge, the last word Kristen has said to me directly about either the Wednesday morning or the beach house. I consider both conversations closed. Let me tell you about where things stand now, 6 months after the closing. Because the story does not end at the sale. Marcus and I have been rebuilding our relationship with the careful, unhurried honesty that is the only way to rebuild something that was damaged by a long period of someone not choosing you. He came to Miriam's house 3 weeks after the sale, and we sat in her garden with tea, and he said things I had been waiting for a long time to hear him say. Not perfectly, not without some of the habitual deflection that 9 years of a particular marriage installs in a person, but enough. Enough honesty. Enough acknowledgement. Enough of his own face rather than someone else's script. I received it with the same care I try to bring to all the things I hold that are fragile and real. I moved back into my own apartment in Northwest Portland in February, 6 months after the surgery, which was later than originally planned and earlier than the darkest weeks of the recovery had suggested it would be. Consuela helped me with the final weeks of the transition. My hip is functional and improving, my practice is active. Patricia's reinvestment structure is performing well, and the $916,000 from the Crescent Cove Road sale is generating income in a managed portfolio that is the most financially secure position I have occupied at any point in my adult life. I drove past the Crescent Cove Road lot in March. I want to be honest with you about what that was like because I promised myself this story would be told with complete honesty. The house was already gone. Pacific Meridian's demolition crew had been efficient. The lot was cleared, the gravel path was gone, the shore pine had been taken down in sections, and the ground was being prepared for the foundation work of the new development. I sat in my car at the edge of the road for a few minutes. I thought about Robert in the Adirondack chairs. I thought about Marcus at 7 years old, crouching at the tide lines, with his small hands in the cold water looking for sand dollars. I thought about the kitchen window and the horizon line of the Pacific that had always made everything feel, for a moment, correctly proportioned. I let myself feel the grief of those things being gone without arguing with the grief or trying to locate a silver lining inside it. The grief was appropriate and I gave it its space. Then I drove back to Portland and I made dinner and I called Miriam and I told her about the lot. And she listened with the quality of listening that 31 years of genuine friendship produces, which is the quality of listenings that does not try to fix anything but simply holds it with you. I thanked her, I went to bed, I slept well. Here is what I want to say to anyone watching this who is in a situation like the one I was in, whether you are 67 or 37, whether the person who called you a parasite or an inconvenience or a thing to be managed is a daughter-in-law or a son or a parent or a colleague or anyone else who has made the mistake of assuming that your patience means you are not paying attention. Your patience is not passivity. Your silence is not submission. The fact that you have not yet said the thing you are fully capable of saying does not mean you do not know exactly what is happening. It means you are reading the room with the full literacy of a person who has been reading rooms for 67 years, and you are waiting for the moment when your response will be the one that cannot be argued with, because it arrived in the form of a document, a signature, and a deed that transferred on a Monday morning while the person who underestimated you was at work in a gray blazer and dark trousers having no idea. You do not owe anyone a version of yourself that costs you your dignity. You do not owe anyone the assumption that what is yours is eventually theirs. You do not owe your silence to people who have used your patience as permission. What you owe yourself is the full use of what you have built across the entirety of a careful and deliberate life. Use it without apology. Use it with the calm of a person who has read the room correctly for a very long time and has simply been waiting for the right moment to let the room know. I want to ask you one question before I close. If someone in your life has treated something that belongs to you as though it were simply waiting to become theirs, a property, a role, a relationship, a piece of your future that they had mentally already claimed, what did you do about it? Or what do you wish you had done? Tell me in the comments. I am going to read every single one. And if this story meant something to you today, please subscribe to this channel. We are here every single day with a new story, and every story is for someone who needed it. Before I go, I want to say something to every person who watches this channel and comes back. You are the reason this exists. 3 of us build these stories every day because we believe that the women who are underestimated and overlooked and packed up like inconvenient furniture by people who forgot what they were dealing with deserve to have their stories told with every ounce of precision and dignity they brought to living them. Your comments and your presence and your willingness to sit with these stories and recognize something true in them, that is the whole point of what we do. From all 3 of us, from the bottom of everything, thank you. New stories every day. We will be here when you come back.